It is a long haul.
All right. So, yeah, I definitely agree with that for sure. It doesn't, this is not built in a day. And that's why I love that 90-day stuff too that Joe brought up. It's just so funny, I think. Funny and disgusting at the same time because it's just garbage. All right. So, we have a guest speaker today. Carlos is from teamengine.io. I one of the people that work for Carlos, Dara, she's fantastic. She's the person I actually have the relationship with. So I think I'm going to hand this over to Carlos sooner than later because I wouldn't have a good intro for him. So I'm going to let you kind of handle that and show people, what you do and how possibly your program can help this group here.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, happy. I'll jump into an intro. Could I get a couple things like one, how much time do I have? And then two, I'd love to just get like a sense for, geography of the folks on the call and any other kind of like characteristics that would help me get a sense for the audience.
Yeah, so we've got about an hour.
Okay.
If it goes over and conversation is ensuing, that's fantastic. We can continue to ask questions and go through things.
Cool.
Uh, I don't. You're looking sort of at all over the country. I can see right now we've got a few from Colorado, Louisiana, Texas, California. It's really kind of all over.
Awesome. Great. That's super helpful. Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. And let me know. Can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
It's a very exciting gray
Yeah.
rectangle. Okay, cool. So I will jump through. I'll give you an intro, and then we can kind of go through the agenda. Quick intro to me. My name's Carlos. I'm one of the founders, and I run Team Engine day to day. And Team Engine at a high level, I'll show you some slides, but basically recruiting, retention, and engagement software focused on basically businesses that have field workforces. Um, my background prior to starting this business, which we've been around for 6, 7 years at this point, um, have about 600 businesses on the platform. I was an infantry officer in the Army, went to business school, came out, and was coming from a small business family originally. I grew up in, including some trades. I thought about going and starting or buying an existing business in industries like the ones that we serve today, and I just came across workforce capacity and quality being a fundamental growth constraint for many of the businesses that I looked at and business owners that I talked to. And so rather than going in the direction of getting into the industry, I decided to build a solution that I found to be lacking for those industries. And so really that's what Team Engine is about. Let's jump in. So I'll talk a little bit more about Team Engine, give you a sense of kind of, what we do and why. We'll talk a little bit about how we like think about the financial impact of the problems that we address, and then talk about kind of three primary opportunities that we tend to see are, um, you might call them like low-hanging fruit for many businesses, but there are a few things that people can basically do relatively quickly or look at, outside of even, talking about our software to have a positive impact on the efficiency and effectiveness of their hiring, retention, and employee engagement processes. So a little bit about who we are. This is basically what we do. We are a software focused on helping companies recruit the people they need, ramp them up once they have hired them, communicate and engage with them as employees wherever they are on a job site or in the field, and then also find opportunities to improve the business based on looking at that workforce. And because the workforce is just so much of the business, the brand, the operations, the quality, the production, we think that's a really important place to look for opportunities to level up. One of the most common things that we hear and kind of why we exist is just running across businesses that struggle to capture revenue because something about the people, it may not be having enough people to do the work that is in front of them to capture the demand. It may be not having the quality of folks. It may not be it may be not having the right people to do the right roles where there is a need. And so that's really what we're focused on solving. And this is just a problem that um, based off of everything that we can see from a statistical and sort of like 30,000-foot view of the economy overall, it seems like a problem that's gonna continue to get worse before it gets better. I personally am optimistic that some of the technology advances that are, especially around AI, that we are seeing are going to have a positive, albeit indirect, benefit on the workforces and industries that we serve. And happy to talk about what I, sort of anticipate some of those things to be. But the fact is that in the short term and sort of medium term, just the workforce itself is getting smaller. There are fewer people entering the workforce than there are exiting, and so this issue, this like labor tightness, labor constraint that I think people often talk about is not something that's like cyclical or going to invert quickly, unless there's like a big change to the economic situation, which is always a possibility. But just the way that we in the past may have gone between an employer's labor market and an applicant or employee's labor market, and sort of like gone back and forth, just purely looking at the number of you know kids that are being born, the number of people that are aging, just like purely looking at the numbers of who's available. The most likely prediction is that this problem will continue to get worse before it gets better. And so I think that's why it's important for the folks who haven't like prioritized their recruiting strategy, their employer brand, that kind of stuff. That's really ensuring that they have both the short-term and the long-term strategies and systems and approaches in place to ensure that they have the people to do the job. It's time for folks to make sure that they prioritize that. Also, by the way, I'm very welcome for folks to jump in and ask questions at any time. I do want to make sure that this is interactive and that you all are getting something out of this, so that you know I have a presentation to go through, and and we can get through it, but I also want to make sure that I make space for whatever you all want to talk about here. So the intent, the reason for like really building Team Engine is a lot of what we saw when we set out to build Team Engine was talking to businesses where their solution for hiring, their solution for getting the labor capacity that they need to meet demand. So many of the solutions or approaches felt sort of reactive or really unscalable is what it comes down to. Stuff like relying on word of mouth, maybe going out and posting a job when a job becomes open, but just thinking about like how much is dependent on having those people in those roles and them being not just like somebody who you can find, but actually like a good quality person to do the job. That is a problem and a priority that requires a proactive system-based solution versus just sort of scrambling and having it be another fire to put out when that comes around. So I'll pause here and just if curious if anybody has any thoughts about, where they see the biggest like costs come out of challenges around hiring, retention, or employee engagement, or just like people stuff in general. Like where have folks, either seen direct costs experience or sort of have a strong belief or intuition that there are indirect costs that they may be experiencing because of this kind of stuff.
I mean, I would say for all three.
Yeah, and well, yeah, for sure. And anything like any ideas about like where it shows up, maybe in ways that are like, maybe some of the clear things like, having to spend money on headhunters or anything like that, but maybe stuff that's like maybe not as obvious of a cost that comes out of issues here.
Carlos, one thing before I guess someone brings you a real question is, does your
Sure.
company or your platform, do you focus on one industry over another, or do you go after everything?
We are not focused on this one specific industry, but we do focus on industries that have field-based workforces. So, like, roofing, construction, other trades, landscaping, also commercial cleaning. Those are make up the majority of our customer base.
Thank you.
But so yeah, and so you might describe, we hear other folks kind of describe like that bucket as deskless workforces. The one distinction about like who we tend to work with, we tend not to work with the more like consumer facing parts of the deskless bucket, which includes stuff like retail or hospitality, that kind of stuff. We focus more on the industries like the ones I described.
Thank you.
Sure. Any thoughts on this question here? If not, I can jump in and tell you kind of some of the stuff that we see.
I know right now that we are using kind of headhunters. I mean, well, I guess right now we've brought on a couple new hires lately that have come from Indeed.
Yep.
If they're posting a job, we've used to try and find door knockers. We've used things like Craigslist, and I know that there's another platform that the guys are using that I don't know exactly who it is, but it takes a lot to get one person. They're telling me that they may have to pay to go through like say 100 people to get maybe 10 or 12, and out of those 10 or 12, one or two will work out.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds right. The top of the funnel is pretty massive. So, just like playing that back, it sounds like, you're incurring cost from just like the job posting itself, but then I imagine there's also a ton of cost in terms of the time and effort that goes into screening those folks, getting them through the door, uh, dealing with the inevitable bunch of those who no show for an interview or first day. And so those are like, on the scale of like direct, like the direct costs, there's things like the job ads, that's a direct cost, like you're spending money for those. There's also like a fairly direct cost, which is like the cost of your team's time in trying to get from those 100 down to those, one or two. But then there's also like some other indirect costs that we can talk about. But one of the ones that comes there is just the opportunity cost of spending time on that versus, on-site supervision of a team or like other things that are high leverage in the business. And Michael, where are you located?
I'm in Denver.
Okay, cool. Down the road. All right. So I will
Where are you
jump
at?
in. I'm up in Boulder.
Oh, right on.
Yep.
We're up to this weekend.
Sweet. Oh, Boulder.
Yep. No, I mean, we were up there for Mother's Day
Okay.
at the
Oh,
tea
last
house.
weekend.
Yeah,
Okay. Duchambe TS. Sweet.
yeah, love that place.
Yep. Okay. Cool. So here's a few of the sort of costs that, we can call out as, the hiring costs, basically the cost that you spend on, sponsoring a job on Indeed or something else like that. For certain types of roles, you end up seeing stuff like headhunter fees. Um, that tends to happen most often with, like more management or kind of executive level type of roles. But we see increasingly companies and especially headhunters um, going to sort of lower compensated roles too, because they see demand there and they see that people are willing to pay the 30% premium to fill those roles as well. So that's definitely there. And then overtime is another cost. If you have fewer folks trying to achieve the same amount of work, that adds up. I talked to some folks who like paying overtime because they think that their employees like it, and they certainly do. It just tends to be sort of a short-term thing. It's not necessarily sustainable over the long term, and so it's important not to entirely rely on asking folks to do more. Um, and then the last is just the opportunity cost again of the time that is being spent on not just the hiring process, but when you do get those new folks, then you have to ramp them up, supervise them, train them, get them to a place where they're actually productive, assuming they don't churn quickly after being hired. I suspect that a lot of folks on this call have the experience of having somebody come on only to immediately leave a day or two after, or even the same day that they started when they realize that it's hard. And so that is a whole bunch of costs that is wasted on getting that person to the point of hiring and investing in them ramping up.
But that's still better than having them be here for 6 months and we put all our efforts into training them and then they leave.
Yes. Well, it kind of depends, but for the most part, yeah, it's true. And it depends on what the cost is that we're looking at. So there are other types of costs, like we might look at on here, like stuff like safety impact of like having folks on the job who are not fully trained, and so it really depends on like which costs we're looking at. But yes, like definitely investing a bunch of effort into somebody and then having them leave at 6 months is a huge bummer. Um, I don't know. I'd be interested to know like what people see and where they see sort of like the amount of turnover and at what stages. For us, we typically tend to see the most turnover with the companies we work with happening in the first like 30, 60, 90 days. And if that is turnover, that is like somebody truly is not a fit and it was not avoidable for them to get to that point and then they realize that they were not a fit. Yeah, it's certainly better at that point than in 6 months. But unfortunately, we do also see in many cases that that turnover that happens early is maybe is avoidable, and it's something that you probably would have wanted to keep. So, it's really important to differentiate between the different types of turnover, those that are avoidable and those that are uh, unavoidable is, basically at the end of the day. So, other sort of indirect costs, things like, the quality of the folks that you're bringing on the team and the average of the skill level and quality of the folks on the team. We find that when people are desperate, when they are, sort of hiring and acting reactively, they cut a lot of corners in terms of the folks that they hire. That has downstream impacts. Those folks tend to be less safe, and to also have an impact on the workplace satisfaction of the good folks on the team, because of the safety risk that they may bring, because of the fact that they may be lower quality. And then we also just see like for the business and its long-term prospects as well. There's a possibility of having to turn down business, but then also being less confident in the work that you are going out to sell and being able to staff it. And so that can also have negative downstream impacts as well. Any questions about any of this, or any of this, resonate, or anything that anybody has seen in terms of stuff like, the impact on the existing workforce of bringing on folks that are, maybe bringing down the average or anything like that?
Well, I guess one question I would have is uh, how do you approach that? Like, how do you find people that, like, I'm in roofing. Our company right now is more focused on residential than to commercial, but I'm here because we're trying to launch maintenance and service division, and
Sure.
as a result, get a lot of re-roofing contracts for commercial.
Yeah.
So how does your company uh, find these people that are more skilled and have more experience in these specific areas, as opposed to using something like Indeed or any other platform?
Sure. Yeah, at a high level, happy to give you a sense for kind of what that looks like. The short answer is that it's really a system that is, if you look at we sort of think about like the employee journey as starting at the point of like, posting a job, sourcing applicants, converting those applicants into people walking through the door. Those become hires, they ramp up, they stick around. Ideally, you have them bringing more folks into the company and elevating the employer brand. So this is really like, there's a lot of different components of this. Usually what we find when we talk to folks is that uh, companies tend to be most focused on the top of the funnel and getting the applicants piece. Like if they get from 100 down to 2, the the it's sort of like obvious that then if you need 4, then you need to go from 100 to 200 up there at the top of the funnel. But we find that actually that is one solution, but actually there's a better solution, which is a holistic view of this entire journey and thinking of it as a cycle versus like a point to point. And so there's a slightly different answer for basically every stage of that game. At the top of the funnel, thinking about sourcing and generating applicants, the one of the big things that we promote there at that stage is around shifting from like sort of specific ponds that you might be fishing for folks in to a much more like comprehensive portfolio of sourcing options. Um, Things like most people rely really on the 2 sources. One is word of mouth, kind of, have your employees bring somebody. That can be really great for getting good folks, but not quite as scalable because, it's just your employees only know so many folks. On the flip side, you have posting on job boards, and job boards are great because they're really good at getting you in front of active job seeking applicants. But in a tight labor market, just getting in front of the folks who are looking for jobs is not going to be sufficient. They're not necessarily like the folks that you want, and in many cases, there's a reason that they're like on there looking for a job and not employed. And so we kind of fill in the gap with a few other solutions that are all centralized in our platform, in addition to making it easy for you to solicit referrals, in addition to making it easy for you to post your jobs to Indeed. We find that there's other sources that are effective, things like social media advertising and doing it through like Facebook's marketing APIs. So we give you the capability of, in addition to taking a job, putting it in our platform and sending it out to Indeed, taking the same setup for that job and sending it to Facebook, sending it to Craigslist, sending it to other sources so that you can get a more complete portfolio of applicants. That's not just like the actively seeking folks and not just the folks that your company knows. Facebook is good at getting you in front of people who may not be actively seeking and your company doesn't know. So it sort of fills in that specific gap. But then also we do things like give you a QR code you can throw on a truck wrap for example, so you can be, utilizing your mobile advertising assets. And all of that is centrally managed, both so you can generate those jobs, keep them, in sync across all those different sources, and make sure that all the applicants you're generating from all those different places show up in the same place for efficient review. So that's just like the sourcing piece of this. Where we find there's actually like a really big opportunity is kind of past that. And let me see if I have a good. This kind of ties into this like first opportunity that I was going to highlight. It's something that like folks can do themselves without the software. But one of the general like approaches that I take to thinking about recruiting and hiring and how to improve it is really encouraging folks to think about it as a sales funnel and sales process, and take the principles and the best practices and the intuition you'd have about how to sell and how to be effective and competitive relative to the rest of the market, and apply that to hiring and recruiting. And one of the biggest pieces is around just like speed to lead. We find that a lot of folks don't necessarily take action on applicants the way they may take action on a lead. And so cutting your time for outreach for a qualified applicant that comes through your funnel down from a day, 2 days, in some cases like 3 days, and having those folks die on the vine, and making it an hour or less, can make a huge difference. And that is something that you can do manually, if you just have folks who are really on top of looking at that applicant pool and seeing the folks that come through. But one of the things that we find is that that is actually a pretty good challenge for software to solve. The same way that you might set up like an auto responder or some kind of qualification to outreach process for somebody coming in and filling in a lead on your website. We're essentially giving folks like the same kind of concept for hiring, where the software does a quick cut screen of an applicant to ensure that they have whatever the prerequisites are for the job, if any. May just be like a valid driver's license or even less than that, and then automatically reach out to those folks in a format that is going to be effective to get in front of them, which what we find is the most effective universally for applicants for these types of jobs is, and generally, to be honest, it's actually across the board the most effective is SMS text. So I guess since we're on that, it just if you can like take one thing away from this, the more that you can think about hiring and recruiting as a sales function more than like an HR function, which is how a lot of people think about it. We find in a lot of cases companies, if they do have an HR manager or somebody who's responsible for that side of house, they throw like recruiting under that. At the end of the day, that's sort of the status quo more than it necessarily is like the right approach, especially in a very competitive labor market. The recruiting function actually is a lot more similar to sales and marketing than it is to HR. And so we really recommend that people apply, take like their, best sales person or person who's typically an owner is going to like think about that stuff the right way and apply that to recruiting. And looking at the second bullet point here, just like every day that you have a role that's vacant has an impact, going back to some of the costs that we talked about. And so it's the shorter you can make that time frame between like having a vacancy and like getting somebody to fill it is going to have that impact in terms of like reducing overtime. But then the third thing that we list here, which I think that a lot of people often overlook, is that the speed of your hiring actually impacts the quality of your hiring. Something that I occasionally hear is folks talking about how, they may get a good applicant, but then like that applicant doesn't show up for an interview, or like, ghosts in the process. And so they must like not have actually wanted a job. It's definitely true in many cases that, somebody who's coming through and applying for your job is like not actually serious. But actually also in many cases, that person is coming through and applying for your job, and then not showing up for that interview because they already got hired. And so it's important to, keep in mind that speed to paycheck, speed to an offer, all that kind of stuff is also really important to your applicants. And so um, you may have a really compelling brand, you may have like a really compelling job and all that kind of stuff, but if the time to get to that point is too long, many applicants are just going to like take the first offer they get. And so it doesn't mean you always have to have the first offer, but having to at least be in the ballpark and be competitive is really key. And so, Michael, going back to your question, this is one of the things that the software really helps with, is basically ensuring that at specific stages in the process, you are just automatically advancing folks to the next stage versus it being manual, tedious, and dependent on a person actually taking action. And one big example of this is, the typical experience for an employer and hiring manager is post a job, get applicants, review them, then pick up the phone, try to call them. Nobody answers because they're calling from a number they don't recognize. They're trying to leave a voicemail. There's no voicemail set up, or it's full, so they don't get in touch, or they send an email and the applicant is just like not spending as much time on their email, so they don't reach them, or they're sending a text, and so they're going to be probably a lot more effective by doing that. But in this case, basically the applicant comes through, applies 15 minutes later. If they meet all the prerequisites of the job, the software is engaging them via text from a local number that looks personal and authentic. And so taking all that friction out of the process, so that when the hiring manager or employer actually enters the process, they're entering and looking at a qualified applicant who is not just qualified, but engaged and ready to pick up the conversation. And so, once this kind of, these are two ways to figure out if you have a velocity problem. Basically, anything longer than 24 hours to review and get in touch with an applicant is there's just a massive cutoff there in terms of the effectiveness of the process. We really recommend actually cutting it down to less than an hour, ideally like kind of 15 minutes, something around there is kind of the sweet spot, because instantaneous is kind of obviously inauthentic. But like somewhere in the 15-minute to hour kind of time frame is reasonable. We do see that a lot of qualified candidates ghosting or no-showing in the process all can be suggestive that somebody else is out competing you in a speed on the speed dimension in the process. Quantity of applicants, but not quality. Turnover in the first 30 days, these all can be symptoms, either directly or indirectly. And the turnover in the first 30 days is sort of an indirect symptom, because it means in many cases that that companies are sort of like taking somebody that they can get versus the ideal candidate. So it's a sort of a downstream impact from not getting the quality of candidates that you would want. Any questions about any of this stuff? Does anybody have like a policy in place for their team that they need to get in touch with their applicants within like a certain amount of time? Take that as a no, or
Yeah, I've never even
We
heard
have
of
a full
that.
recruiting department, so this is kind of, I have no idea like what their process is personally from my end, but I do know they have mentioned, even if, and I don't know if this is necessarily along these lines, but let's say we bring in a candidate for an interview and the decision is no.
Yeah.
That response is within 24 hours, and kind of not leaving them on the hook wondering what's
Right.
going on. So ideally it's a quick turnaround. It's to some degree like recruiting. If you're especially in a recruiting department and that's your main job, like you're essentially in sales, to some
Exactly.
degree. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. And like making sure that you have a policy around getting them that response is really key for like at least two reasons. One is like just it's the right thing to do, and so it supports your employer brand. But the second is that it ideally frees your team up from having people like calling in and trying to find out the status of their application. Especially in the case of if there are walk-ins, we see that is very common. And so like just making sure that happens like every time and in a way that you would want it to happen is really helpful as well. Cool. And Paul, do you have like a policy around like sales leads and having a time to response for your sales team to get in touch with us?
yes, 24 hours. I mean, I'm of the mind like, don't want to be like make it seem like we're desperate for work, So it's like, hey, lead came in, we're calling them. Like within
Right.
5 minutes, we have a business development guy that does it, So we let things kind of like simmer a little bit, but definitely within 24 hours, that first, or I guess second touch, if it is a lead from a business development rep, that second touch is definitely made quick.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, so then I would expect that there is a policy like that in their recruiting team as well. But yeah, that's interesting. Okay. And yeah, just like some idea about ways you could think about like, estimating the financial impact. You could do it based off of like overtime. If there's actually you're like, turning down business, obviously you could look at that and the gross profit that you're, turning down because of that. But we think about hiring velocity and the number that can most directly be calculated off of it is something around like a daily cost of vacancy and probably making that like gross profit oriented if you find yourself actually like turning down business as a result. One of the things I mentioned being like a core part of this is text messaging. We find that text messaging is a really effective first touch point in this process. Now, a lot of people like see this and hear me talk about this and might think like, well, I don't just want to text. Like, we need to pick up the phone and talk to these people and like interview them. And I absolutely, 120% agree with that. The key thing that why we talk about texting is that from the perspective of an initial touch point, an initial response for an applicant, and just like introducing yourself, who you are, why you're reaching out, we find that texting is the most effective first touch point and is really effective at teeing up that phone screen or getting them scheduled for an interview so that you can convert that applicant into somebody who's an engaged applicant into somebody who's actually walking through the door. So whether you're doing this, through your team on like company phones or using a software to do it, I really just recommend like making sure this is like, part of your arsenal. The advantage of having it be software based, and there are other vendors who do this besides us, so I just want to be clear about that, is that when it lives on a personal like company phone, it sort of lives in a silo, and hiring ultimately is a team sport where you have like somebody screening, there may be other people screening and then handing off to a hiring manager to actually like do the hiring. And so it can be really helpful to have it be software based so that you have a common picture of every applicant, including all their touch points, their communication, ideally like recordings of phone calls and all that kind of stuff so that so that you have as much visibility across the team on the applicant. But also it makes it easier on your screening team to like kind of package the information for the actual hiring manager to make a decision, and then like that hiring manager doesn't have to rely so much on like the assessment of a screening team. They have as much of like sort of the primary documentation on that applicant as possible to make a hiring decision. Okay. here's just like some examples of the software and the way that you can configure automated communication with applicants at different stages. Like what you're seeing here is there's an applicant coming through and they're qualified, getting an automated engagement point. This is a confirmation around an upcoming interview, kind of like how you would get that in advance of a dentist appointment or something like that, like, making sure that you're still planning to come in. We find that can be really effective for employers to actually get a sense of, which interviews they have coming in and showing for that day, and also making sure that those reminders are sent to the folks on the team who are actually participating in those interviews as well. Okay, I think we're kind of getting close to the end of time, so I might go through this a little bit quicker. The rough I see a lot of different sort of benchmarks or rules of thumb around how to think about the cost of turnover of an employee, and very much to Ross's point, it also does really depend on, like, is it day 1, is it day 60, what's the role, all that kind of stuff. But kind of a rule of thumb that we find for many, at least, of the more entry level roles in the industries that we see, is it's something around like 4 to 6K is a rough sort of good and conservative benchmark compared to all the other ones that I've seen. Frankly, this is on the lower end. And so we just really recommend that folks think very deliberately about the experience of a new hire in the 30, 60, 90 days past their start date. We do see that a lot of companies really sort of hang their hats on getting somebody hired, and that's mission accomplished. But again, like what I talked about earlier, we really recommend that folks think not about this as like a linear process with a start and end, but as a cycle. And the first 30, 90 days we find to be a really important opportunity for setting the right conditions for maximizing retention of the folks that you want to retain, but then also ensuring that they get ramped up into productivity as soon as possible. So, what I recommend that folks do is that they sit down and map out their ideal experience for a new hire in the first 30, 60, 90 days, not just what training they're going to receive, but what is the company going to do to ensure that they are set up for success, feel set up for success, their feedback is captured, you're getting a referral from them at the right time, they're getting set up for all their benefits and all the standard kind of HR stuff as well. So some good practices that we see there is making sure that they get some sort of like an introduction to the company, like maybe get like a video from an owner or founder. They get asked for feedback on their onboarding experience, so you can both capture feedback for continuous improvement and signal that this is a continuous improvement kind of environment. And then I do also recommend that companies ask their new hires for a referral at day 30. That tends to be kind of a good sweet spot where they have been on the team long enough that they have a decent odds of being successful, and they're still sort of in like the honeymoon period of their new job. And so you have the opportunity to tap into a new network of potential referrals through that employee. Does anybody have an example of like a process or like a new hire playbook that they've put into place and have an impact they've seen from that?
I know I've been at a couple of places that I've had different responsibilities within the process of hiring. Like I was kind of like the last place I was like more of an ambassador, so I would just kind of talk to them and give them an idea of what the culture's like, and kind of not this person who's asking a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
And then of course there's this company, Service Advantage, and one or two others, but I've never seen like a process.
Yeah.
So my answer is no. It's just kind of someone has an idea of a process in their head, and you're going to do this and you're going to do this, and we just kind of wing it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's we see that often. There's a couple of reasons that I think we see
And it
that.
doesn't work well.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's probably like three main reasons if that we see that. First reason is, just like you don't have time to put it into place. You don't have time to like, sit down, write it out, put a process behind it. Other things just like so frequently end up taking priority, and so it's very understandable. The second reason that we often see it is that, if you sat down and thought about, if you like mapped out, okay, at day like 7, this should happen at day 30, this should happen at day 40, this should happen at day, 55, this should happen. And you have somebody starting today, you have somebody starting on Monday, you have somebody starting on Thursday, you end up with this like huge like layering of all these touch points that they end up being like one-offs, and somebody has to track them and make sure they happen. And so that can be like pretty tedious, and that's a reason why software can be a good way to solve that kind of thing, because software just like does it. The third reason that I think is people don't always like acknowledge, but I suspect in many cases is part of this, is that I think a lot of people have sort of like given up on like investing in like too deliberately in their new hires in some cases. They figure that they could put all this effort in and then only for them to leave, in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And that one's kind of tricky because that can turn into a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. At the same time, is like the less that you invest in the folks, the more likely it is that your lack of investment is validated because they do churn. And people are always going to churn. You want to reduce that as much as possible, but there's always a risk. And so we find again that like doing this, but doing it through software so that it doesn't create as much of a burden on the team to actually execute it. It just happens. It's a nice middle ground between like making sure that it happens and investing a lot in making sure that it happens. So just food for thought is I do recommend that at a minimum, people sit down and figure out what this looks like and figure out like a good, better, best of it. Like, what is enough to feel good about what you've done and what is like the ideal, and figure out what like your company can actually support. Because just like you've put all this effort into hiring these folks, and it's just, it's unfortunate when the folks that could be successful are not.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just like an example of some of like, the stuff that we set up for folks. But there's so much you can do here in customizing, like making sure that folks are adopting technology that you want them to adopt, like, clocking in and out of an app, making sure that, they and their supervisors are doing, quick check-ins at day 30, asking them for referrals, just making sure that the equipment they have is like is well adjusted, confirming that they've completed like safety training. Is just and the nice thing about this is, again, this is going out as a text, so it removes any like technology barrier to adoption and success. So it can be really powerful for supporting all the other stuff that should be happening in those first 30, 60, 90 days. And then the last is just communication with the workforce. Generally, we find for many companies in the industries we serve, there's no like one format that really works for everybody. So you end up with this sort of hodgepodge of communicating important messages during the morning rollout, or sending emails to the folks who have emails. If you have some folks on WhatsApp, like if you have any H-2B or recent immigrant workforce, they might be on WhatsApp, so you send something there. Text for others. Put pay stub notes every week, because everybody's going to look at those. Ask your supervisors to relay stuff and play a game of telephone, etc. And so just finding like a way to consolidate those into a single sort of format that can rule them all as much as possible is something we recommend. And again, we just find that text is like pretty effective across the board for reaching those folks. And so that is another piece of what we do is give you a software solution for communicating with your entire workforce in any language across text, WhatsApp, email, and phone. You can also set up a directory of your team and call them from the software as well. But trying to like get as much of that fractured, siloed communication into one place across technology, language, office field, etc. Okay, we're coming up on time. I want to leave some space in case there's any questions before we break. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have for the presentation. Any questions anybody has? And or Michael, I want to make sure that you feel like you got a sense for the answer to your question based off of what Team Engine does. So let me know if there is any questions hanging out
No,
there.
I think you've well explained it. It's definitely a lot different than just posting on, something like Indeed or other ad platforms. The way that you handle more of it with software as opposed to time, taken from a person's day to
Yeah.
manage all these different systems. I think it's brilliant.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, a lot of the inspiration behind it is we just find there's like so much repetitive, manual, tedious stuff in this cycle, this employee journey. And at the same time, although it's like, tedious and manual, it's still essential and time sensitive. And so it's a good problem for software to solve so that like your people can be like freed up to do higher leverage people stuff. So it's basically just trying to like give you a team member that's not a team member so that your people can do other stuff.
I love it.
So we've got a question here, Carlos. Can you touch on pricing?
Sure. We price. It all depends on the business and if you want all the stuff I talked about. So we do price the recruiting piece separately from employee engagement in particular, and then the basic pricing. I think the starting point is somewhere around 700 a month, and goes up from there. And it depends on size, company, how many jobs you're posting, how many employees you have in the system. So that'll give you just like a rough sense of the starting point, but it depends.
And are you okay if we so Dara has been invited to our community for a long time, and
Thank you.
you can do posting, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with School, but
Oh yeah.
SKOOL, yeah. So
Yeah.
Would you mind if we were to post this slide deck in there, and this way if people want to contact you, they can reach out and kind of find you guys, and then from there even Dara can continue to post like once a month if you guys have stuff that you want to update,
Yeah.
kind of top of mind and value. So
Oh yeah.
that would be great. I've already got a couple of questions that I would ask like off of this initial post.
Sure. Oh yeah, be very happy to do that. And one thing I want to also mention is that I'm very happy to be helpful in any way I can. It doesn't have to be through the software. If anybody wants to just bounce ideas or like ask about like something they're seeing in their process, and if we have any thoughts, I would love to just be helpful in any way
Awesome.
I can, whether it's through the software or not. But yeah, would love to do that.
I definitely love the idea of treating this like a sales process. Like that has enlightened me completely. I've never
Great.
thought about it like that, and I'm going to start coaching like that and
Yeah.
think about that for our own company. So
Yeah.
that is fantastic. And then one of the things we do coach on the sales side through our program is what we call speed on base, which is what you're calling, hiring
Speed to lead.
velocity.
Yeah. Yep.
And that fits right in perfectly too. That's excellent. So those are
Oh
kind
yeah.
of my two main take homes. But yeah, I'll
Great.
email you and Dara. Maybe Dara can post it, or I can add it into the community, because we want to make sure that people are aware of you guys and know how to contact you.
Great. That sounds awesome. Yeah, and if anybody, we'll post our contact details, but my email is carlos@teamengine.io if anybody wants to shoot me an email as well, or you can find us on LinkedIn. But yeah, thanks so much for your time. I hope everybody got something out of it. And if I can be helpful, don't hesitate to let me know.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Carlos.
Carlos.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a
Have a
great
good
weekend.
weekend.
Bye.
See you guys.